very interesting.
So, orang pendek, in past years, what have we learnt about Richard? Well, he's pretty heavily into the sauce. He likes to drink a lot. Yes, he has got a bit of a drink problem, hasn't he? Yeah. And he can get quite violent as well. Yes, he's a bit of a nasty piece of work. What else have we found out? Well, he has a soft spot for, cheap painted strumpets too. Yeah, big time, yeah. Anything else? He's on the drugs, yeah, you name it, he done it, yeah. And what have we found out in the intervening year, in the past year? What do you think's been happening? What's he done? I think he probably killed a lot of kids as well. He probably killed a bunch of kids. That's the sort of guy he is. That's how he rolls. That's Richard Freeman. Shady character, not good. I've simply got a bunch of slides on a memory stick because I don't do technology. Use that.
But you do sing beautifully.
That working? Yeah, I think that's. Can you hear me? Right, good. Earlier in the year, I went to Sumatra for the fifth time, my fifth expedition in search of orang pendek, and I should really be trying to get Indonesian nationality. I'm virtually living over there now. Glutton for punishment, fifth time. Can we have the first slide, please? Now, this wasn't an expedition financed by the CFZ. For once, this very, very rarely happens, for once, it was financed and backed by a television company, the Scienti Films, based in France, and they make documentaries on all sorts of subjects for French and German television. So this was all expenses paid trip, which is something that happens very, very rarely. Now, a bit of background. That is for those who don't know, that is the Indonesian island of Sumatra. It's one of the largest islands in the world. It lies to the southwest of the Malayan Peninsula, and to the southeast, to the southwest of the Malayan Peninsula and west of Borneo. You can see the long range of mountains running down. It is a very mountainous country. It was once entirely swathed in forest. Unfortunately, most of that's gone now. What is the orang pendek when it's at home? Next slide, please. That's a reconstruction by the artist Mark North on a rather good book on the subject, which is available at a very reasonable price from the CFZ store. Orang pendek seems to be an upright walking species of ape. When we think of mysterious apes like the Yeti and the Sasquatch and the Yeren, we think of very tall, bulky, powerful animals about 3 meters tall. The orang pendek ranges in size from 3 to 5 feet. It's very broad, very muscular, immensely strong, walks upright like a man. It's been reported from the jungles of Sumatra since the time of the Dutch colonials, way back in the early 19th century, perhaps even before that. There are references in early works to this creature, orang pendek. The name means the short man. So, as I say, I've been there 4 times before, and every time I've been, I've found evidence. I've found footprints, I've found hair, I've heard the animal calling. And the reason I go back to Sumatra again and again is because the evidence is so good. And this particular area we go to, every time we get evidence. So we don't just go on an expedition and leave it at that. We do backup work. We analyse things, we analyse footprints, hair, things like that, and then we return to the area. So we don't just leave it at one expedition. There are other animals that I'm hoping to do this with as well, but orang pendek is the one we've been concentrating on because we've got so much evidence for it. Can we have the next slide, please? That is a model of orang pendek made by a sculptress and taxidermist called Del Morse from London. Well, she's from Wales originally, but she has a studio in London. And she approached me some time ago asking for information on the orang pendek, and I told her everything I knew about the orang pendek, and she made a whole range of these models of orang pendek, including this fella here that she's very kindly donated to us. She flogged these for about £2,000 and she gave us one completely for free. Can we have the next slide, please? That's a picture of Adele with two of the other orang pendek. She made about 9 or 10 of them for an exhibition in London. And it was for part of a competition, a national art competition with a £10,000 prize. And she said if she won this competition, she'd donate something towards an orang pendek expedition, which was very generous of her. And Dave Archer, who's seen the orang pendek, and myself went down and saw her show, and she'd decked the place out to look like a Sumatran village with all wooden huts and stuff, and the orang pendeks all around it, and bits of film and so forth. Unfortunately, she came second in the whole country and not first, and there was nothing for second prize. But anyway, this French guy wanted to get her along as an artist, to get an artist's perspective on eyewitness accounts and stuff, and see how accurate these models were, what could be improved, to do eyewitness sketches and so forth. And so it was only the three of us went. It was quite a small team. Next slide, please. Usually we travel from Padang, which is the largest city in western Sumatra. The orang pendek now is only really reported from the western part of Sumatra. We travel generally via Singapore, but this time we went via Java, and it took us much longer, 22 hours. And then we instead of going across the mountain route, we went along the coastal route, and we stopped at a roadside cafe, and I tried one of the things I've always wanted to try. This big spiky fruit here is a durian. Orangutans eat durians, they're very fond of them. And I've always wondered if the orang pendek eats them as well. I've always wanted to try a durian, so this is the only time I've managed to get hold of a fresh one. Can we have the next slide, please? I opened it up, and it smelled like a mixture of rotting onions and very stale urine. It tasted like liver pate that had gone rancid. So I ate 2 segments of it, and then the rest I gave to the guides.
Bet they would have been it.
They loved it, they wolfed it down. They're welcome to it. Anyway, that's possibly one of the many things that the orang pendek eats. The next slide, please. Our guide in all the past expeditions has been a guide called Sahar Dimas, and you've probably seen many pictures of him before on our various expeditions. Unfortunately, he died at a very young age of 41, just months after our last expedition. And we went to his village and caught up with, that's his middle son there, and that's his widow Lucy, who's actually getting on quite well. She works in a local communal farm, and Sahar's brother John is looking after the family, and he's now become a very skillful guide in his own right, as his eldest son, Raffles. But it's good to catch up with her again, and it's nice to see she was doing very well. The CFZ and Extreme Expeditions and Pat Spain from Beastman all got together and raised some money to send to her after Sahar's death. Can we have the next slide, please? That is that's a sketch made by Sahar based on eyewitness accounts. Sahar actually saw the creature himself along with Dave, but this is a sketch made before he actually saw it, going on other people's accounts. So broad shoulders, fairly short legs, very divergent big toe, quite a small head, very long muscular arms, big barrel-shaped trunk. That is the general description of the orang pendek. Next slide, please. So while we were at Sahar's village, we interviewed a group of eyewitnesses, and it's as far as I know, the most eyewitnesses that have ever been interviewed. All of these men had either seen the orang pendek itself, or they had seen its footprints. The footprints were described as having a human-like heel but a divergent big toe. Generally, they describe them as being about the size of a human hand in length, those who had seen the footprints. The creature had been actually seen in person by a number of these men, and usually they were out hunting in the jungle, hunting pigs. And they saw the creature, it saw them, and they both ran. One man saw the orang pendek squatting down and eating ketan fruit, which is this large reddish fruit you get in the area. And when it realised it was being observed, it ran away, leaving the chewed fruit behind it. The descriptions tallied remarkably well. They all described it as being about 1 metre tall, having a very big barrel-shaped chest, long arms, deep-set eyes, a flat nose, and a wide mouth. They all described it as being either black or dark grey, or a mixture of the two, rather like the grey you get on the back of a silverback gorilla. So all of those sightings were remarkably consistent. They all were within the last 12 months, and they were all within about 5 to 6 miles of where we were, this particular village. We generally concentrate our investigations around a lake called Gunung Tuju, because every time we go there we get good evidence, we hear it calling, we find tracks and so forth. And so we decided, stick with what works, we'll go there again. So we began a long and tortuous climb up to Gunung Tuju. Can I have the next slide, please? That's myself, the fat bastard in the middle in the hat, that's me. There's Adele, and that is the French filmmaker Christopher Killian, and he did all the sound and all the filming himself. He did get one of the Sumatran guys who had some experience with a camera to use a much smaller camera as a second unit cameraman. That's the entrance to Kerinci Sabak National Park, and behind it looms Gunung Tuju. Next slide, please. The first time I climbed up to Gunung Tuju, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. It's such a long and tortuous climb up what seemed like great never-ending steps of mud and gnarled roots. I did have a very heavy pack on my back then, and I was trying to go at a reasonable pace. The second time I went up, I thought, to hell with this, why have a dog and bark myself? So one of the porters carried the pack, and I took it at my own pace and got up there fine. This time, rather unwisely, we set off quite late, and it was very, very hot getting up there, and it was absolutely exhausting. I was soaked with sweat by the time I come up there, got up to the top. Then there's quite a long, steep climb down the other side, because it's actually the crater of an extinct volcano, and this is the lake itself, Gunung Tuju. It's very mysterious, very beautiful looking, but I was horrified to see there was more graffiti there than I'd seen before, and litter. More people were visiting the area. There's a great big rock near to where we get the canoes, and so we see it every year because the canoes are right next to it, and it had graffiti all over it this time. There was litter, and there was also a band of students walking up through the jungle making a very, very loud noise, and I thought, oh no, we don't stand any chance of seeing the orang pendek now. We'll get no evidence because they'll have scared it away, they're making so much noise. So I was feeling pretty downhearted when we started to cross the lake on these wretched old canoes. Can we have the next? These terrible battered old canoes, you may have seen pictures of them before, there's pictures later on, look like they came off the ark, and they were old even then. I'm always surprised they managed to stay afloat, but they always do stay afloat, even with masses of luggage on them, although at times you do have to bail them out. Finally, we got to our campsite, which is a small, flat, bay-like area. It's only the only real area you can camp around the lake, because most of the rest of it, the jungle goes straight down into the water, and you have to clamber up branches and roots to actually get onto the shore. Thankfully the students didn't stay, they were just there mucking about for about an hour or so, and then they went. But I thought, oh, all that noise, they're going to frighten the orang pendek away. And this is a picture of Adele and Chris just after we got there and set up camp. Now, as twilight began to fall, a sound came out of the jungle, and John, the guide, said, "Orang pendek." And the sound went sort of like this. Hop! 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 And it reverberated around the jungle. Chris tried to get his recording equipment out, but it stopped by the time he got it all out. Now, there's a primatologist called Professor Chithers who described exactly the same sound, orang pendek making exactly the same sound. Now, when I've heard orang pendek before, it's made this sort of a noise, sort of a much deeper, more throaty. But most primates have more than one vocalisation. I'm familiar with all of the primates that live in the area. I've kept most of them in captivity, and I know what noise they make. And it wasn't any of those. It wasn't a hornbill, it wasn't a bear, it wasn't a tapir. I'm familiar with all these and the noises they make. It was something, I didn't know what it was making that noise. I was unfamiliar with it. And John said straight away, orang pendek. Can we have the next slide, please? That's one of the terrible, wretched, battered, hideous canoes. You can't tell quite how awful they are until you've travelled in them. They're terribly uncomfortable, awfully wet, they leak, but knock on wood, they've never yet sunk. Next slide, please. That is to give you some idea of what the edges of Lake Gunung Tuju look like. They're very steep because, like I say, it's an extinct volcano. And the jungle goes straight down to the water, so there's very few places you can make a camp on. It's quite steep up there, you have to go onto those ridges. And it's quite a climb up there. It's cloud forest, so it's quite cool, and it's very, very damp. You think you go to a jungle, it's going to be hot all the time. It's not here, it gets very cool. And you see those clouds around the top there. They often come right down, almost to the water. Next slide, please. Those are a picture from our first day of trekking, and that's some pitcher plants, which are very common up there, and there's a bit of folklore that monkeys drink from them, and they're called the monkey's pitcher. Next slide, please. That was a track we found on the first day. Now, Andy said pictures of tracks don't do them justice, but you can see the general shape there, toes at the front, down at the bottom you can just make out where the offset big toe is, and a rounded long heel, but it wasn't good enough to cast. But whatever was making it was on two legs, and we'd heard the orang pendek calling, so we were pretty sure it was in the area. Can we have the next slide, please? Another piece of evidence is this, that the khitan fruit. And we went in late June, early July, and the khitan fruits were ripening and falling out of the trees. They're about the size of a coconut. And near to these tracks was one of them that had been masticated. And the guides told us that the orang pendek feeds on this fruit, and not many other animals do. Sun bears don't like it, tapirs don't like it, gibbons don't like it, but orang pendek goes for it. And that was a chewed khitan. We found quite a few of these. This was quite near to the tracks. Next slide, please. There is John measuring one of the tracks, but it's not highly visible. It wasn't a terribly good track. It was on a bit of an angle, not ideal for casting. Next slide, please. Whilst we were out in the jungle on that first day, we found the remains of a tapir that had been killed by a tiger. And I've heard tigers roaring in the distance a couple of times when I've been at Gunung Tuju, but I've never actually seen one. But we've found tapir kills before, and this one had been completely stripped of meat. It was quite an old kill, but the bones were still intact, possibly because in the cooler environment up in Gunung Tuju, there's not as many animals there to nibble away at them. That there is John Dimas Sahar's brother, who's now become quite a good guide in his own right. Next, please. Another interesting thing we saw on a tree there, those are the claw marks of a tiger marking its territory. It's quite an interesting thing to see. And like the Orang Pendek, every time I go to Gunung Tuju I find evidence of tigers, which is heartening because in most other places they're really becoming rare, but at Gunung Tuju it seems there's still a reasonable population of them. Next slide, please. On the second day, we went to the far side of the lake. Now, for some strange reason, the jungles on the far side of the lake are very different to the ones on the side of the lake where we camp. They're much damper, and everything seems to be very brittle and crumbly. The branches of trees are very brittle and they break away in your hand, and the floor is very damp as well. Took us about 45 minutes to get across, bailing out as we went. Next slide, please. That's a shot of the jungle on the far side of the lake. Now, we were listening to Siamang gibbons, who were calling on the crest of that hill. And a bunch of us were all listening to the gibbons when this happened. Can we have the next slide, please? Adele spotted a track. Now, I had brought some dental cement, which is like a very fine plaster of Paris, to cast tracks. And back in England, I got a great sack of it. They sent me far more than I was expecting. I can't take all of this to Sumatra, purely for weight and space reasons. So I needed to measure out how much I'd need. So I did a bit of a practice getting the consistency right and making fake Orang Pendek tracks in the backyard and pouring the stuff in to gauge how much I'd need. But what I didn't expect was, or what I didn't factor in was how much more porous the ground is here in the jungle than it is it's much more damp and porous than it is in England. And it took the entirety of the dental cement I brought to do this one track. If you're wondering what those strips are, those are parts of one of my old shirts that we tore up to put on the back to try and give it a little bit more strength. Can we have the next slide, please? There is it when we took it out. It's still covered with earth. Unfortunately, it cracked in two. So Adele's got it down in London at the minute, and she's going to fix it up for us and give it us back when it's all fixed. Next slide, please. There's another picture of it. Once again, you can see a very human-like heel and a broader front part of the foot. Next slide, please. Very close, we found some handprints. Unfortunately, we couldn't cast them because we'd used up all the dental cement. That's John there, sticking his hand over the print to show you its outline. And back in 2011, Andy found a print and cast it, and he's given us a copy of it, and we've got it up at the CSZ headquarters, and it's very unlike the hand of the Sumatran orangutan. It's got much shorter, more sausage-like fingers and a much larger, more opposable looking thumb. It's more like the handprint of a small gorilla than an orangutan. And we found a couple of these, and it looked like the animal had been going up a slope, and it had leant down and put its hands down in front of it to help itself up the slope as it went, to help it balance. Can we have the next slide, please? The next day we went out to another area of the forest, and we found some tracks near a rotting log. Now I think that we've found two keys to the Orang Pendek and possibly getting more evidence. One of them is go when this khitan fruit is fruiting, which is June, July. And also rotting logs. They love rotting logs. There's lots of accounts of them ripping into rotting logs to look for grubs and things. Now we found a set of tracks near this rotting log. You see back there, very human-like heel. At the top, an offset big toe, and then at the front, 1, 2, 3, 4 very human-like toes. Can we have the next? That's an even better track. There you can see the heel down at the bottom, the offset big toe, the other toes at the top. And I wish I'd had more dental cement to cast these, because they were far, far better and far clearer than the one we'd used up all our dental cement on day one. So we had to make do with filming and photographing these things. Next slide, please. In the same area, we found quite a lot of hair. I took some small sealable jars and some ethanol so as we could take samples without destroying the DNA and send them over to Lars and his team. This is us picking up some hair. We found an awful lot of it, of several different shades and lengths, probably from different animals. There were some small white ones, I'm fairly confident are from the Malayan tapir, but there were some darker ones which looked like they could be more interesting. And of course we're using tweezers and surgical gloves there to stop them being contaminated. Next slide, please. That's an inevitability of being in the jungle of Sumatra. You get leech bites. I've still got visible leech bites from 2003. Every time I go back to Sumatra, I get a fresh crop of leech bites, and they're still here. I don't know if you can see them. Yeah, they're still there. They don't actually bother me that much, leeches. Some people freak out over them. I just let them get on with having a bit of a feed and leave them to it. They're not nearly as nasty as ticks. Anyway, next slide, please. Now, we went out virtually every day and we heard the animal calling again. We heard this huh, huh, huh sound, but we could never quite get it. We could never quite record it. It would always finish before we got the recording equipment out. And it seemed like the animal was just ahead of us. Back at base camp, one day we found one of these. It's a gigantic earthworm, huge. And can we have the next slide, please? That's a shoe, to give you some idea of the size of it. It's a whacking great thing. Next slide, please. Now, we stayed up at Gunung Tuju for about a week. And each time we went out, we found more evidence. We found more hair. We'd hear something calling. We'd find some more tracks. And we filmed all this, and there's going to be a full-length film all about it. We've just got to edit it together. We were very lucky with the weather. Usually it rains torrentially up there, and it hadn't rained at all. And on our last night there, it started to chuck it down. So we all piled into a pondok, which is like a big tent made out of tarpaulin and sticks that the guides construct. And we spent the night in there chatting and talking and drinking and telling jokes and things. And at one point I got a distinct feeling of being watched. I had the absolute conviction that there was something out there in the dark looking at us. I couldn't see anything, I didn't hear anything, but I knew there was something in the dark looking at us. The next day I went up the little path that leads from the camp into the jungle. 30 foot from our camp was that fresh tiger pug mark, which had not been there the day before, and John confirmed this, that there had been a tiger there the night before, 30 feet away from the camp, which was quite exciting. Can we have the next slide, please? So after we left Gunung Tuju, we went down to a city called Bangko in the lowlands, and I've been there once before with Chris Clark and John Hare, and we had the very strange experience of eating in a restaurant shaped like a train. They have this restaurant shaped like a train, and all the carriages are where you eat. And I remember thinking, I bet there's no one else in the world doing what we're doing now, eating dinner in a train-shaped restaurant whilst talking about going to hunt a mystery ape. Anyway, that was a complete digression. We didn't go to the train-shaped restaurant this particular time. We went to visit this man. The man in the hat there is Pak Sapandi. It's not the same Pak Sapandi we've met before, who runs a sort of homestay hostel place. He's a completely different guy. We came to interview him. He was one of the Suku Anak Dalam, or Orang Rimba, the original inhabitants of Sumatra. Most of the modern Sumatrans are of Malay descent. The Suku Anak Dalam are the original Aborigines of of Sumatra. And before, I've referred to them as the Kebu, because I was told by the other Sumatrans they are called the Kebu. And the name meant fortress because the forest was their fortress. It was where they were their strongest. But apparently that's not true. Kebu just means dirty, because the other Sumatrans don't like them. You see, you get racism everywhere. I remember talking to Sahara about the Kebu once, and he said, no, the Kebu, they're dirty, they're horrible, they have tails, they're like monkeys. So racism is endemic everywhere you go. Anyway, this man, Paxabandi, the chap there with the glasses is Dr. Ahmed Yanwar, who is a primatologist, originally from Sumatra, now lives in Java, and he helped Debbie Marta on her searches for orang pendek in the 1990s with Flora and Fauna International, and he got out a map of Sumatra and he showed all the places he had gone to where the animal had been reported, and it had seemed to have a much wider range there. But he never saw the creature himself, he never even saw any tracks, although he heard a lot of accounts about it. So he came to talk to this gentleman, and he saw the creature about 40 years ago. So unlike the other witnesses up at Gunung Tuju, this was way back in 1973, not just last year. And he said he'd been walking through a graveyard abutting the forest. Now the forests in the lowland have suffered much more than the forests in the highland. Kerinci National Park is about the size of a small country, somewhere like Montenegro. It's a massive place, but a lot of the lowland jungles have now been completely lost. But back then there was more jungle, and he was walking through a graveyard, and it's about 5 o'clock in the evening in a rainy season, and he saw this creature he described as just rising up. It had been sitting on the floor and it stood up, and he thought it was a ghost at the time. I asked him what, or Hantu, they call ghost Hantu. And we asked, why did you think it was Hantu? And he said, because it seemed to combine human and animal features, and it rose up from the graveyard, and that's why he thought it was a Hantu, a ghost. But on reflection now he realised it was actually an animal, and an orang pendek. He said that it was grey in colour, very thick and barrel-chested, and about 1 metre tall, so we're getting the same description. He said its face was very like an orangutan, much more like an orangutan than a gibbon, and it had long hair and long, powerful arms. And the two stood and looked at each other for about 2 minutes, and then he turned and ran away, and the orang pendek remained standing still. It didn't run off. At the same year, his brother saw an orang pendek in the same general area, but the one he saw was black. Can we have the next slide, please? That's another picture of Dr. Yanwar there when we were conducting an interview with him, and he got the big map of Sumatra out, showing us all of where he had seen the orang pendek. Now, paradoxically, on this trip, we found more evidence of the orang pendek than ever before. And looking at the tracks, I thought there was at least 3 individuals knocking around, which is more than we've ever seen before. So it might mean there's a good, stable population in Kerinci National Park. But Dr. Yanwar was pointing out all these other places that there had been reports of orang pendek from, and now there are not. Very few of these other places have reports. Nearly nowhere outside of Kerinci National Park has these reports now. We have the next slide, please. This is Andalas University. We went there because Adele had been asked to do a demonstration of taxidermy, because she does taxidermy. She's most famous for having a really badly stuffed fox that looks like it's stoned, and it's sitting with its legs crossed, and she was going to throw it out, and she put it up on eBay and sold it for £300, and it became an internet meme in Russia, and they went mad for it in Russia, and she's been asked to go on 2 tours of Russia talking about a badly stuffed fox, and one Russian village on the borders of China has even erected a bronze statue of this fox. What? That's 40 in itself. But she did a demonstration of taxidermy on a bird they got there, on a type of jungle pigeon. Can we have the next slide, please? That's Dr. Wilson Nevado, and he is a zoologist at Andalas University. And both he and Dr. Yanwar looked at the cast and were convinced it was a footprint, but it was nothing that they knew of. There was no kind of animal that they knew of. And this guy was very interesting. I was talking to him about zoology in general, and I mentioned my interest in reptiles, and he was telling me about the different snakes that had been found on the campus, because Dallas University backs out onto jungle. It's one of the few bits of decent-sized lowland jungle, and tigers have been found in there. They've been caught on camera traps, and sun bears and other animals as well. But it's got quite a rich variety of animals. And they were doing a census of snakes, and I said, "Did you catch any reticulated pythons?" And I said, yes, there were several caught. And I said, "Oh, how large are they?" Oh, the biggest one was 12 metres. And I thought, oh, there must have been some breakdown in communication. And I said, "How big?" And he said, 12 metres. And he showed me the notes, printed notes from, he didn't catch the snake himself. It was people who were clearing scrub near the jungle had caught this snake, which was measured at 12 metres. Now, the biggest known reticulated python is about 10 metres. So if this measurement's accurate, it's broken the world record. I asked him, was his snake killed? And he said no, which was a relief. And I said, "Do you know what happened to it?" And he said, "Well, I think it was sent to the zoo in Bukatingi." So we went down to the zoo in Bukatingi. I loosely call it a zoo. It was an absolute nightmare. Cages full of dead and dying animals, no keepers anywhere in sight. It was almost, I once had a nightmare about walking around this zoo with like ghost and zombie animals in the cages, and it was almost like that. It was very bizarre. They did have reticulated pythons there, but the biggest one was no larger than 10 feet. So what the story of this snake is, where it ended up, I just don't know. But this guy says he's been donated 40 camera traps by Cologne Zoo, but he's got to get the money together to get them sent over to Dallas University. But he says if we can help him raise the money to do that, he will use some of these, will be Tuju to look for the orang pendek. So that's a project we're working on at the minute. Unfortunately, my emails to him keep going astray, so I have to go through Dr. Yanwar, because for some reason I can't get my emails through to him, so I have to use Dr. Yanwar as an intermediary. Can we have the next slide, please? That's Adele with a linsang, a member of the civet family. It's not a live one, it's a rather badly stuffed one. That's of no real relevance other than that it's a linsang, and you don't often see a stuffed linsang. Next slide, please. Those are skulls of the Menatawe dwarf gibbon. The Menatawe Islands are off the west coast of Sumatra, and there's a gibbon related to the much larger siamang on the mainland. But these are an example of dwarf, island dwarfism, so they're much, much smaller. Can we have another slide, please? And that's me showing you just how small these gibbon skulls are. So, where do we stand? What do I think the orang pendek is? Next slide, please. That is Pongo abili, the Sumatra orangutan. And the next slide, please. That is Pongo pygmaeus, the slightly more robust Bornean orangutan. At one time it was thought that they were subspecies. We now know that they are separate species, and they probably speciated something like 400,000 years ago in Sunderland. Give us a wave, Geordie Dave. He's asleep. I've just mentioned Sunderland.
Sorry, Richard. What about Sunderland?
Next slide, please. You see on the left there, that is the landmass of Sundar, or Sunderland.
Yeah.
The whole of the Malayan Peninsula, Sumatra, Borneo, Java, they were all connected by land at one point. At the end of the last ice age, when the water levels dropped, when the water levels rose, most of this was swamped. So you've got the islands forming in the peninsula there. The orangs, the two species of known orang, had speciated already, for whatever reason, when it was a whole landmass. My theory is that the orang pendek is the third extant species of orangutan, and it is adapted for life on the forest floor. It's not arboreal, or not as arboreal as the other two, which explains why it's got this very human-like heel. There's something standing upright and walking around on two legs. We'll need this to support its weight and to balance. That's what I think the orang pendek is. I think that's the last slide. What's the next? Is there another one? Oh yes, yeah. So, yeah, I've got to go back again. As it stands now, Lars received the samples. They were all put in ethanol to preserve them, but the ethanol leaked. I thought these containers were going to be waterproof because I brought them from a site that specialises in scientific equipment, so I'll have to be more careful next time. The ethanol leaked out and I had to replace it. So Lars has prepared them. He's sorted the wheat from the chaff. Some of the things were filamentous algae, others were hairs. One of them was a human hair, but there were small dark ones which are from some sort of primate. And now his colleague Tom is going to try and extract DNA from them. That's where we stand at the minute. I really hope you can get some DNA from them. Will I be going back to Sumatra? Of course I will. I'll be going back again and again and again until I get the evidence that proves this animal exists, because I am 100% sure the creature's there. I've heard it calling, I've seen its tracks. Dave and Sahar saw it in 2009 from a distance of only 100 feet. Apart from the thylacine, I think this is the animal, that is the cryptid that is most likely to exist. And I'd just like to finish off by dedicating this talk to the late Sahar Dimas, who was a legend amongst guides and a close friend, and is sorely missed.
Okay, boys and girls, we are running stupidly late, but that is roughly it. Richard, I hope you will forgive me if we don't take questions from the audience now, but you're going to be presumably in the bar for quite a while.
Yes,
talking
yes,
things there. We also have some copies of Richard's book on our appendix for sale here, and we have others of Richard's books in there. But, Richard, have you got your raffle tickets?
John, we've also got the quick announcement.
Sorry?
We've also got the quick announcement me and Richard was going to make.
Yes, of course.
Yeah,
I've forgotten about that. But can I do the raffle first?
Yeah, we'll do the rest. Yeah.
And can somebody, is there anyone here who has not got any raffle tickets? No, this is not for the reason you think. I'm not trying to sell you some. I've got Steve Jones's raffle tickets. I want someone to pretend to be Steve Jones for me. Who's going to be Steve Jones?
Yeah, okay.
Lars, you can be Steve Jones. Can you come out here, Jojo, my dear? And is Nicola around? Hi, Nicola! Oh well, bring me the raffle thing. This one is going to be drawn by the lovely Graham, my glamorous assistant. No? You don't want to be the lovely Graham? Okay, we'll have a look at the first of the prizes. Over there, we've actually got 5 prizes tonight. Jojo, where have you gone? There's work to be done, young lady. Go over and get that bottle behind. There is a bottle of plonk, what has been donated by the Wolseley Tiny Tots.
What, Tiny Tots drink plonk?
I bloody hope so. I've done my best to influence the children of this village. This is a bottle of Contiano Prosecco Superiore, 75 centilitres, brewed 2012. Would you like, Karina, would you and Jojo be my glamorous assistants? Would you like to pull out the rabbit out of the hat? Yes. The first lady is here, so. Except no substance. We have white 954. Is that white? Lilac 954. 954 lilac. Sorry? There's deep different glasses. It's all consulted. Lilac, there's somebody there. I've got lights in my eyes and I have no idea who it is until he gets here. You have won a bottle of plonk donated by the small children. Okay? If the glamorous Jojo now goes to get that plant, glamorous Jojo. This plant is also donated by the Tiny Tots. How Nicola ended up having the Tiny Tots thing, I don't know, but It doesn't really matter, this is from the Tiny Dots, it's an orchid, give us a twirl, lovely Jojo, and it's another, it's Judge Smith. I can't think of anybody who'd like an orchid more. Shove that over there, we'll deal with Judge in the morning. Would you like to get a third one? By the way, I've had several people ask me if Judge Smith is actually a judge or a justice. He is actually, it's an old family name, and some years ago he decided to forsake the name Chris, which is what he was born with, and use his middle name of Judge. Now, for a collection of interesting things. We have, I haven't got enough hands. Jojo, come here. We have an album by the Atkins May Project, who is the guy who's the original singer for Judas Priest, and another bloke who wasn't. For those of you who are interested in fantasy art, it has a cover by Rodney Matthews, and it was donated by the jolly nice people at Gonzo Multimedia. We also have a DVD of Death in Venice, directed by Tony Palmer, and I've seen that. It's actually really rather good. Sorry? No, this is the opera, but it's still quite freaky. From Ancient Aliens to the Shift, Grand Unified Theory by Daniel D. Davis. As some of you may know, until recently I was the editor of UFO Matrix magazine, and I used to get sent all sorts of old crap, and this is part of it. And a large, very limited edition, because they're never going to be made again, a t-shirt from the Guyana expedition from 2007, as given to us by the computer games company, who for the life of me I can't remember their name, Capcom, who sponsored it. They gave us a box of them, which will never ever be repeated, and here is one for you guys. If we have one, if it's the wrong size and we can change it for something that suits you more, we will try. If we haven't, tough. Lilac 933. Lilac 933. Richard, go and shout in the bar. Lilac 933. But if there's nobody in the bar who does it, they can't be bothered to write their name on the back of it, we'll take another one. Property is set, man. Okay, should you go and get me up to the next prize, so we can at least tell them what it is while we're waiting for Mr. Lilac 933. Or Ms. Lilac 933? Well, he might be a hermaphrodite. One never knows what's that. You hang on to that. We have another Atkins May Project album, also with a different one, but also with I think we're going to Max, I think you're going to have a different size t-shirt. I think that's too big for you.
I've already got a copy of this album, so...
Have you? Have you got a copy of their other album?
No, I haven't. Can I do a swap?
Swap it.
Excellent. So my sort of music.
I know. You stupid type like that heavy metal head stuff, don't you? Yo. Here is, actually this is really rather cool. I've got it because they sent me 2 copies and I've hung on with this. This is the Yardbirds featuring Jimmy Page, live on the German Beats Club. And the album of the Atkins May Project, which Max and Vivian rejected, and one of the t-shirts, and we'll swap it for one that fits you if we've got it. And another wonderful book sent to me in my capacity as ex-editor of UFO Matrix, who is going to be the lucky winner of Alien Encounters of the Western United States, a picture book. It's blue, 215. 215. Somebody.
Oh yeah.
Andrew, you're going to love it.
Thank you very much.
The Yardbirds DVD is really, really good.
Cheers, thank you.
Okay, we have one prize left. How much do you want to guess? It's a couple of things for Gonzo Multimedia, some book and a t-shirt, but I'm not quite sure. We have, oh, this is really good, right? We have Salutation Road by Martin Stevenson, which again, I'm only getting rid of because I've already got a copy. We have, and this is also really good, we have The Small Faces on Beat Club DVD. DVD. We have... Let's do the t-shirt before we leave the best for last. We have a t-shirt from the 2007 expedition. Now, would you, my dear, like to pose with that so that boys and girls can see they're getting a Michael Jackson biography with lots of pretty pictures in it? What is it going to be? Who is going to be the lucky winner? It's going to be... Come on, give us a 12 grade. It's the last one of the evening. Come on. Yeah, but you've got to sort of exaggerate your movements more. Come on, don't you remember that's been to the generation game? Come on, Tom. Love you so much. It's blue. 131. 131. Who has won the Michael Jackson book? Who has won the Michael Jackson book? Oh, do I see somebody? Do we have a winner? Or shall I torture you all by doing another one? 131.
What, blue?
Yeah.
That's Nicholas.
Who would like to go and present that to Nicola? Does she? Was Nicola gone?
Yeah, she's thinking of increasing her position. She'll be right.
A book all about Michael Jackson is really going to make her feel less queasy. That's what we like to hear.
She told me she was going to next it, but I can't remember what she said.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of the official stuff, but Jackie has got something to say. We have the lovely Jackie.
Yeah, this is from my friend Jackie, who came up with a rather good idea. This is Jackie's idea, not mine. I can't take credit for it, but it's just a vague idea, and we're testing the waters to see is it feasible, who would be interested. But it's Jackie's idea. Jackie, take the floor. It's the Richard Freeman official charity for beer.
Yeah, you probably sent the leaflets just on the reception desk on the left. We were trying to think what's a really good way of getting to as many expeditions as possible in a year, and also allowing more people along really and making it more open to the general public. So me and Richard are thinking of trying to start a company. Richard and I, yes, Richard and I. It's too late for my English to be honest. We're thinking of starting a company that people, members of the public, sort of can pay to go on. We're going to try to make it as cheap as possible. We're going to have some budget trips, perhaps, and some more expensive trips, depending on who we've got going along and what equipment we're having to use. We've got a market research questionnaire at the front, if people would like to say what the areas of the world they're interested in going to, what skills they'd like to learn, and the animals they'd like to look for. Because we're going to try to do it as, we're going to sort of try to, when people leave, they're going to be sort of trained up to do basic tracking, using camera equipment, learn about distinguishing sort of folklore from facts. You know, so we're going to sort of try to, so you know, somebody comes on the expedition, they're going to leave with a set of skills. It's, as you've seen from the shots, it's not going to be a luxury holiday. You know, people have got to be prepared to rough it at times, and it's going to be quite exhausting. But I think, you know, obviously the shots today and things like, you've probably seen on Sky, Operation Borneo, that's the sort of conditions you're sometimes going to be on. So, you know, if you're prepared for that. But we're going to do a website soon and have more information. So if anybody's interested, talk to me and Richard tonight or tomorrow, and the leaflets are on there, and I'd be really grateful if you could fill out some of the market research questionnaires. Okay, thank you.
Jackie, I think it's a really good idea. It's something that I've been thinking about for years, and I think it's a really good thing. I have had some requests this afternoon, though, from several of the younger members who are here, younger members who will be saying that it would be really good if you did some things for teenagers as well as stuff for adults. I give that to you for what it's worth, in the same way as yesterday I said, I think it would be really good if you do some stuff for disabled, well, crops like me who can't do teenagers.
Yeah, well, we can do exhibitions hanging around shopping precincts in trainers, listening to awful music.
Oh, Richard, shut up. Okay, before we go, Silas. Silas, where are you, Silas? Silas! Did you remember the book tonight, Silas?
I remember the script.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm off. Richard has some books here. Silas has a story.
Thank you. It's another story from Richard's Japanese collection. And it's called Primary. There's a quote at the top. The innocence of sleeping children dressed in white and slowly dreaming stops all time. That's by the Cure. Is anybody going to stay? Have any takers? Is there a hardcore? Will I take that as a yes? The sun was beginning to draw close to the horizon. Slats of amber light shone through the blinds and fell across the crisp white sheets. The room was still. Barely an hour ago it had been full of life. People from all over Hakodate, indeed from all over Hokkaido, had filled the room with colour and noise. Wakasa Ichiro had been gratified that so many people had come so far to see him. His 2 daughters and his son, the latter who had come all the way from Osaka, his 6 grandchildren, 4 great-grandchildren, and finally little Riko, his great-great-granddaughter, who was only 18 months old. Then there was the mayor of Hakodate and dozens of well-wishers from the city. Reporters from several papers, including the Hakodate Observer, at which he had worked for over 30 years, had turned up as well, as a film crew from the local television station. Even in a country whose population was the longest lived in the world, his age caused interest. The cake had been huge, by necessity to hold 100 candles. He had counted them all before failing to blow them out. He was getting a little out of breath, things like that. But not too old for a nip of his favourite sake. The papers had asked questions about his youth. What had it been like growing up in the 1920s when Hakodate had been given city status? He spoke of the Great Fire of 1934 that killed over 2,000 people, including some of his friends and relatives. He was one of the young men who had helped the overburdened rescue service, helping to save many lives. He still bore the scars from the burns he received to his hands, though the wrinkles now masked them. Time erased all things. Some asked about his time serving with the army in Borneo and Sumatra during World War II. He had spent a good part of the war recovering from a snake bite that nearly killed him. After the war, he became a reporter and progressed on to travel writing. He had seen much of the globe, from England to Bolivia, from Tasmania to Botswana. His life had been an interesting one. Ichiro had always meant to write an autobiography, but he never got round to it. He still had boxes of notes all banged out on that creaky old typewriter of his. He never did get on with computers. He supposed it would be down to one of his children to write his life story now. Ichiro told his guests that he had felt blessed. He had escaped death a number of times in the war and seen many of his friends die young. And then he outlived those who were left. He had a good wife, Noah, who had passed away 5 years ago and whom he still missed. But he had a good family. He had lived for many years now with his eldest daughter, Takako, and her husband, both of whom cared for him very well. He spent most of his time in bed now, but he was still able-bodied enough to pot around the garden for an hour or so in the warmer months and admire the view out over the bay. The party had taken it out of him, even if it had been enjoyable. He needed a little rest now. Just as his head began to nod, the door of his room swung open. He looked up and saw the silhouette of a child standing in the doorway. It must have been one of his great-grandchildren. Perhaps the child had left something behind and returned to retrieve it.
Toro, is that you? Did you forget something?
The child shook its head. As he drew closer, Ichiro could see he was a boy of perhaps 6 years. Ichiro realized that the child was not Toro, or indeed any of his family's offspring. And the boy was curiously dressed, looking very old-fashioned. His hair was drawn back into a topknot. He had geta sandals on his feet that clacked on the floorboards as he walked, and a plain kimono with an obi. In his hand he held a wooden staff, taller than he was. Ichiro thought that he might have been a child brought in by many of the local well-wishers who had visited him.
Have you lost your mother and father?
Yes, the boy answered, a long time ago. The boy drew closer and sat down on Ichiro's futon. He looked somehow familiar. Was he a relation? I waited for the others to leave before I came so we could talk in peace. The boy's voice sounded young, but he spoke like an adult.
Do I know you, young man?
I hope so, Ichiro-san. We spent many happy hours together. Ichiro sat up in bed and looked more closely at the boy. Something stirred in his memory, like a carp in the leaf-strewn depths of a pond, but it seemed to slip away again.
Whereabouts was that, my boy?
At the old house up on Gagyozan. Ichiro started at that name. He had not heard it in a long time. Gagyozan. Mount Cowsback. The old name for Mount Hakodate. Ichiro and his parents had lived in a house in the foothills when he was a boy.
How did you know I lived there?
I lived there too.
You live in my old house? How wonderful.
Ichiro beamed. He had not thought of his childhood home in many years. You lived there with Wakasa Takayuki, your father, and Wakasa Chika, your mother. Oh, and not forgetting dear old Raikou, your Japanese Spitz. Now Ichiro was genuinely puzzled.
How can you know all this?
The three of us used to play together in the cherry orchard behind your house.
How old are you?
I am 6 years old.
Then how could you possibly have played with me? I was born in 1910.
The little boy leaned on his staff and smiled. I have been 6 years old for 1,700 years.
Who are you?
Oh, come now, Ichiro-san. Don't say you cannot remember me. Your old friend Hajime? The old man shook his head.
Hajime? Well, I thought you were just
A dream? In a way, I suppose I am.
You were an imaginary friend I had when I was living up on the mountain. We were higher up than most other houses, and I didn't see other children as often as I would have liked.
So you dreamed me up as a playmate? That's what they all tell themselves as they grow older. Tell me, Ichiro-san, how old were you when you last saw me?
About 8, I suppose.
Yes, that's the age when I fade from the view of most children. You see, I was not an imaginary friend. I was a real one. I was your home's Zashiki Warashi.
The parlor child? That's just a myth. No myth? Is this real enough for you?
Hajime reached forward and touched the old man's cheek.
Oh, you are so wrinkled now, so old. And you're so young. No, time does not touch me, but I am far older than you, Ichiro-san. Your house was one of the oldest in the city. It dated from the 15th century, but other houses stood there long before, and long before them was a Buddhist temple, and before that, a Shinto temple. New religions build over the old. Go back far enough, and you will find the first religion. Back then, there was a religion in Nippon that had long since been forgotten. Only vestiges of it are known to people today. The Chinese visited Nippon in the 3rd century by the Roman calendar, and they took a few notes on it. There was a high priestess who lived alone on a temple mound where she communed with the gods. One man was allowed to visit her. He transmitted the messages of the gods she gave him to the people. She was a very beautiful girl, and her existence was a lonely one. After a while, as she grew into womanhood, the inevitable happened. She had a child with the priest. Both were supposed to be celibate. They hid me for as long as they could, but after a few years I was discovered. The people grew angry and lost faith in my mother. They demanded a sacrifice. Me. I was killed and buried under the temple so very long ago. Were you scared?
Oh, I was too young to know what was happening. The other priests gave me some kind of drug. I felt no pain when they slit my throat. It was just as if I were falling asleep. From then on, my spirit was charged with bringing luck to the temple and to whatever building stood on its site after its walls had turned to dust. 1,700 years is a long time. The world changes so much. When I was a boy, a living boy, this country was still filled with magic. Dragons swam in the seas and rivers. Nue and Tengu haunted the forests and mountains. Man seldom sees them now. All that time I had played with the children in the temples and houses. Novice monks, the boys and girls of the generations of families that have lived here. But the curse of Zashiki Warashi is that our playmates forsake us. Our friends forget. You see, only a child can see a Zashiki Warashi until they reach the age of 8 or so. Then we are as invisible to them as we are to adults. It is a lonely existence, knowing your friends will only last a few short years. I have seen hundreds of children come and go, whilst I stay, unchanging and alone. There are no children in the house now. The man who owns it is unmarried. He seldom visits, except at weekends with his mistress. I think it is time the old house had children in it once more. The cherry trees are in blossom. Come, Ichiro-san. Little Raikou is waiting to play with us again. As the last rays of the sun gave the horizon a purple glow, 2 children walked away from the house in the city and made their way up the mountain.
Thanks, Silas, that was brilliant as ever, and a good improv on the dog.
I thought people might have forgotten who Riker was. There's quite a lot of polysyllabic names.
13 minutes to run.